In this episode of the Fireside Chat with Neo, we're going to talk about can SIP investments in a PMS help you with your wealth creation targets. SIP, or a systematic investment plan, is a tool that was popularized by the mutual fund industry. SIPs essentially allowed investors to invest into the same fund at a fixed interval, say on a monthly basis. This ensured that an investor continuously participated in the same product. It also helped the investor average costs, focus on unit accumulation rather than returns, and manage market volatility by maintaining that discipline of staying invested. SIPs have actually worked wonders for the mutual fund investor. So the question is, can it really do the same for a PMS investor? Let's look at 3 powerful reasons why SIPs could be the tool to help you reach your goal of FIRE. So if you want to be financially independent or if you want to retire early, SIPs could actually unlock that power of early retirement for you. Let's take a look at the first reason, which is perspective shifts. When we start thinking about sipping into a particular product, we display a higher level of conviction in the process and the style of investment management. We're also willing to stay the course for a longer period of time. When we don't do an SIP, typically a PMS investor spends a lot of their time and energy trying to find the right product or the right manager. And we need to have that mindset shift from thinking about your PMS investment as something which is just an investment product to something that could be a saving solution. When this mindset shift happens, we're able to commit more capital, we're able to participate through opportunities and cycles, and this actually has a lot of positive effects, which brings us to the second point, which is cycle participation. In Howard Marks's book, The Most Important Thing, he talks about a few things which are the most important things in investing. That's an interesting title, but when we dig deeper, one of the most important things when it comes to making investment decisions is to know exactly where we are in a cycle and how to appropriately act towards the opportunities that are presented before us. So, what we need to acknowledge as investors is that the market or opportunities are not going to be the same throughout time, which means if you're continuously participating in your PMS investment solution, then you're going to capture different opportunities at different parts of the market cycle, and you're able to do a wider range of investment actions, and you're always going to have something that's interesting and that's a growth engine for you in the future. This is specifically true of multi-asset approaches like Neo, where the opportunities for participation can be much wider because you're not just looking at one single asset class like equities, you're looking at global investments, you're looking at precious metals, and maybe even fixed income into your portfolios. So these opportunities continuously change, and with a wider choice of asset classes, you have wider participation opportunities. So if you haven't considered doing an SIP in your PMS product, this might be the best time for you to start thinking about how continuous contributions can help you move that needle towards that FIRE target that you've set. This brings us to the third point, which is compounding benefits. Warren Buffett once said that his life has been a product of compounding. Now, why is that the case? Compounding means allowing our investments to work at their own pace without interrupting them. As investors, we're often tempted to interrupt our portfolio's compounding by taking certain actions. Right? So, for example, if we see that markets are very volatile, we try to predict the direction of the market. So, a more aggressive investor might wait to catch the bottom, a more conservative investor might pull out during phases of market volatility, or someone might wait for performance before they decide to really participate in an opportunity. So, timing these decisions actually works against the power of compounding. On the other hand, if we had a systematic, disciplined way of investing, we wouldn't be trying to time the market, and even an average result in terms of averaging out would give us a much better result in the long run, and we look at the numbers in just a short while. The second big disruptor for a non-resident Indian investor is exchange rates. A lot of the time we try to get the exchange rate right or favorable, or we're trying to predict the direction of exchange rate movement before we make contributions to India investments. However, this approach doesn't work because exchange rates are one of the most difficult things to predict. There are simply too many moving parts. You're dealing with two different economies economies, geopolitics, and many other factors that could drive exchange rates in directions that it's impossible to predict. So focusing on the exchange rate is really not going to give you a great entry or exit point. However, when we choose the SIP route, you're actually going to average out your exchange rate, and that can reduce the risk. If at some point you feel that the exchange rate is more favorable, you can always scale up your participation. If you feel that it's very unfavorable, you can scale down your participation. But an SIP ensures that we're continuously participating and helps even out some of this exchange rate volatility that you might experience. This is similar to why mutual fund investors benefit, because the NAV volatility gets evened out when you continuously participate across a long period of time. The third big disruptor is cash flow management. Sometimes investors make long-term commitments to their portfolio but are unable to honor them because they have to fund short-term goals or unexpected expenses. So financial planning at this point, or segregating your long and short-term investments, can actually ensure that your compounding goes interruption-free throughout. And that can be the most powerful thing. Because I promised that we would look at the numbers, let's take a quick look at what happens if somebody just starts off with an initial investment of 50 lakhs in a portfolio management scheme versus another investor who manages to invest 1 lakh every month towards their PMS investments. Now, when we look at the data across 5, 10 and 15 years, you're actually going to be shocked by what we see. If your investments are compounding at 12% on a long-term basis, then I think the numbers would look like this. For an SIP investor, the SIP contribution alone at the end of 5 years would be 80 lakhs, whereas the initial contribution would have grown to 95 lakhs. At the end of 10 years, the SIP contribution would have grown to 2.4 crores, whereas the initial 50 lakh contribution would have grown to 1.75 crores. So clearly, on the 10-year benchmark, the SIP contribution outshines the initial contribution. Of course, you have invested more by way of SIP, but you can see that the divergence is really happening here. If we fast forward 5 more years into the future, then what you'd notice is the SIP contribution grows to 5.35 crores, whereas the initial 50 lakh contribution compounds to about 3 crores. Now, the difference between them is about 2 crores odd, and an investor who would have invested only 1.8 crores more, right, by way of SIP in this time period. So that 25 lakhs that they've made, which is extra, is totally from compounding. And that's about 50% of what you started out with as your initial investment. So if you run your SIP for the long term, you're very likely to recover or compound at a much higher rate than you can imagine. So every small investment that you make, or every large investment that you make, makes a big difference in what your outcomes are going to be. And if you want to shorten the timeline to retirement, then SIP is the way to go. Thank you for watching this video. Stay tuned for our next update in NEO in April.